What's up, y'all? It's your boy Brandon Doulos Garrett, and I'm back with another episode of Brandon's Book Report. Today we have another wonderful book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Such a wonderful book. This is about trauma. What is trauma? Trauma is anything in your life that has prevented you from growing, something in your life that has prevented you from interacting with the world around you or the people around you. Trauma can be anything. You don't have to be a rape victim. You don't have to be a combat veteran. You don't have to be someone who survived a natural disaster or maybe a terrorist attack to experience trauma. Trauma can be any event in your life that has made you take that event, not move beyond it, and develop a defense mechanism or patterns of behavior around that event to keep it from happening again or avoid confronting it. Um, he starts off the book talking about how he worked with combat veterans. These people were veterans of World War II and Vietnam. There was more patients than doctors at the time, so he had to do group sessions. When he did these group sessions, it was hard to get them to talk, as all group sessions are. But once he got them to exchange war stories, he found out it was really easy for them to open up. But when it came to talking about after the war, how has life been with your spouse, with your children, with your job? It was very hard. They would often shut down or they would often dismiss it and go back to war stories. And he quickly realized that people with trauma have a hard time moving beyond that event. We become very attached to those very profound, horrific moments in our life, and that becomes our whole being. And we have to learn that part of your life, a fraction of what happened to you, is not the total of you. Trauma happens on a very anatomy level. Like when you go through something, your brain changes and it works very different. Certain parts of your brain will fire and other parts of your brain will not fire. You have the left side of your brain and the right side of your brain. One is for emotions, I believe that's the right side, and one side is for logic, that's the left side. And what happens when you are being triggered by your trauma, the whole left side of your brain is going to shut off. And the only side that deals with emotion is only going to be firing. And your brain is not completely working as a whole unit. We discover how trauma works and how your brain processes and receives information through diagrams and explanation in this book. And I thought it was very interesting, very eye-opening. So when you take in information, you have what's called the thalamus. That is part of your brain that takes in all five of your senses: taste, smell, touch, hearing, sight. It takes in all that information from the world around you and processes it. It takes that information and it'll go down to the amygdala. The amygdala is a walnut-sized part of your brain. It's by the brainstem. And it determines danger. People who have trauma, people who are sensitive, maybe introverted, they have an overactive amygdala. And what happens is anything that relates to that trauma or that discomfort, any smell, any bright light, maybe a loud noise relates to that event in your life. And your amygdala is going to determine that as the same thing. Like, oh, danger, danger, danger. And you're going to react before you even realize it. When you touch a hot pan, you're going to be grabbing your hand, screaming, ow, before you even realize what happened. If something goes even near your eye, you're going to be covering your eye before you can even process what's happening. And that's because that part of your brain will send the signals to the rest of your body before you can even know what's going on. And then, what's supposed to happen, though, is after your brain, that information reaches the amygdala, it's going to say, okay, there's no danger. That was just, a loud noise. The house isn't on fire. That's just something burning in the kitchen. That's what's supposed to happen. And then it's going to send that information to your hippocampus. Your hippocampus is part of your brain that's like the filing cabinet. It keeps all the records. It puts the narrative of your life in a past, present, and future context. What happens to people with trauma is they don't have that part of their brain. The information doesn't reach that part of their brain before they react. So they can't determine what is past and what is present. So automatically they're reacting and they're pulled back into that past event as if it's happening to them in that very straight moment. This is what's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's very sad. People who have really significant trauma in their life, they can't determine where to place it in their life, and it probably becomes very confusing when that happens. After that, the information is to go to your prefrontal cortex where you make decisions. Mammals have the biggest prefrontal cortex. Humans, have the biggest prefrontal cortex out of all mammals. That's what helps us develop language, cognitive thought, a sense of self is all in your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain. So it's interesting how all those things work together and become a single unit. What happens with trauma and PTSD is we have a fight or flight response. Anytime danger comes your way, you are programmed to either run away from it or confront it head on and fight it. What happens is when you are held down, maybe you're trapped, you're unable to enact in those fight or flight responses is when you become traumatized. You are unable to do anything about it and you develop a sense of helplessness. You often will become hijacked by your emotions or you become shut down. Your brain puts all of its energy into not allowing you to have to face that horrible feeling again or that horrible event again. So it's going to put all of its energy instead of functioning and interacting with the world around you and growing and doing other things. You're going to put all your energy into not having to deal with that ever again. And you see this with people who shut down, who are traumatized. They often are very, they're just staring at the wall. There's not much coming out of them. They're not really interacting. They're not reacting very well. You can barely get words out of them sometimes. And those are people who are usually traumatized by something, according to the book. A group of people that they study in the book, they put people in brain scans and they trigger their trauma purposely, and they see what part of the brain is firing, which parts aren't. They take these two people, it's a couple, a married couple, Stan and Ute. They are citizens of Canada. And at the time, I'm not sure if it's still the biggest, but at the time it was the biggest car pileup, biggest car accident in Canada history, where a wreck on the highway resulted in an 87 car pileup on the freeway. Stan and Ute were caught up in this accident, and they were trapped. They were trapped in their vehicle, and there was a fire, and they watched people be burned alive. They had to sit there helplessly and listen and witness people being burned alive. And they themselves were almost burned alive before a bystander kicked out their windshield and rescued them. So they were obviously traumatized by this event. Now, Stan exhibited one of the spectrums of PTSD, which when being triggered, you freak out, you're maybe screaming, heart rate elevates, sweating. When he was being triggered, parts of his brain were that communicate emotion were being going off, but parts of his brain that are logic, and the part of his brain, the hippocampus, that triggers when the narrative, when past, present, and future, was not firing at all. It was completely dark, and the amygdala was the brightest spot in that diagram that he shows, where that part was firing the most. Now, you, who had been in the same accident, had a completely different side of the spectrum of this result, where nothing was firing at all. Most of her brain was dark except for her amygdala and a couple other parts that inhibit danger and emotion were firing. The rest of her brain was very dark, so she was the other side where it was completely shut down. I thought it's very fascinating how on anatomy level, we realize it's not all in your head. That was the narrative for a long time, is get over it. You're overreacting. It wasn't that big a deal. Get over it. But really, on an anatomy level, the brain shows how it is not working properly because of this trauma. He talks about how medication, it has made huge leaps and bounds for certain parts, for certain disorders like depression and anxiety, where people do have a chemical imbalance, and that medicine will help them regulate and function at a much more better level. But when it comes to trauma and PTSD, which happens to a lot more people than we realize, it becomes more of a slippery slope where it can help a little bit, but really, as the author quotes, you become more of a patient rather than a participant in your healing process when you put your entire focus and your entire faith into medication rather than treatment. He goes into different EMDR tests, which is kind of like hypnosis, where you kind of just, you don't really have to talk, you just follow the doctor's finger or just a moving object, and you're able to kind of navigate that event and kind of deal with it and not be as triggered. He goes through neurofeedback, where they do electromagnetic waves in your brain. Neil Brendan, a comedian, talks about that, where it feels like something's tapping on your head, and that part was interesting. So you have different wavelengths of your brain. So the slowest part of your brain's wavelength is when you're sleeping. It's not when you're conscious. It's when your brain's processing the day's events, and it kind of categorizes it into your brain. That's why you dream. It's just your brain sorting things out while you're asleep. And then when you're waking up but you're still sleepy, or maybe you've been up all day and you should be going to bed, but you gotta finish a paper, but you're still like kind of out of it, typing. That's when your brain's working a little bit faster. And then you have the alpha brain waves, which you're relaxed but you're in deep thought. And then you have the alpha beta hybrids, where your brain's speeding up a little bit, and then you have those beta brain waves, where when you're excited or you're scared, you're in terror, that's when your brain's functioning at the highest rate and kind of overreacting. It's really firing like crazy, and you're not as well in control. So people who are in trauma, obviously their brain functions either at that beta rate, or they're at that kind of sleepy stage. They're barely functioning. And with that neurofeedback, it just kind of it's an electromagnetic pulse, and it kind of just gets your brain cranking a little bit faster. And it's very beneficial. You don't have to just go through trauma to experience this treatment. It's very expensive. Insurance doesn't usually cover it. But they said people who have gone through this treatment, read better, think clearer. And that's what we all want to do. That's the whole point of this book. That's the whole point of this treatment, is to learn how to operate at a better level. So we have different parts of our brain. We have our reptilian brain. That's more of your brain stem. That's the part that once your brain starts developing in the womb, and until your birth, that part of your brain's gonna be ready to go. That's the part of your brain that is responsible for breathing, for sleeping, for eating, for crying. Those are things that you never have to teach someone to do. It's just something your brain already knows how to do right when you come out of the womb. Now you have your mammalian brain. This is the part of the brain that starts developing as soon as you're in about first grade. It's the part of your brain that interacts with the rest of the world. It's the interface between you and the rest of the world, and between you and your tribe. As mammals, we exist in groups. That's the only way we're going to survive, because we're not very big, we're not very fast, we're not often carnivorous. So we have to exist in groups in order to survive. So the mammalian brain develops, and it looks at your tribe, which usually is your family, and it says, okay, how do I function best here? What do I do that makes my mom like me more? What's the thing that I do that makes my parents dislike me? It's a way to get in good with your pack. So that's part of your brain that develops, and then you have your prefrontal cortex, your medial prefrontal cortex, which is what humans have, and it's what helps you make decisions. So how we think often is from the bottom up. We take in our senses, we feel something hot, we feel something cold, and we act accordingly. But often what happens is we get hijacked by our emotions. Oh, that's hot. Oh, that's a loud noise. Why would you do that? Why would you scream? I'm trying to get my work done. We react often negatively, when there is a way to think from the top down. It's a training. It's about being aware of your body, being aware of your surroundings, taking deep breaths, and then, obviously thinking before speaking. The Bible talks about, be slow to speak, slow to be angry, and quick to listen. And that's how we often need to train ourselves to do. And it talks about that in this book, about how treating yourself and training yourself in a way that you don't overreact to things around you. Often we become disconnected from our body. That's why yoga, working out, is a very good way to mitigate anxiety and depression and other troubles in your life is become very in tune with your body. You have a thing in your, we have a way to regulate ourselves with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic functions of our bodies. When you inhale, you increase your heart rate. And when you exhale, you decrease your heart rate. That's why meditation is very important. Breathing exercises. There's a lot of different little nuggets that this book magnifies, and the importance of practicing every day in order not to be hijacked by your emotions. I think there's so much more trauma that we all experience that we don't realize affects us. And I think it's so important to be very mindful of these things. I think it's so important to realize too that this can be anyone, this can be your neighbor, this can be your friend, this can be your spouse, and they don't even know it half the time. So how can you even know it? So I think it's very important that when someone's being rude to you, when someone's having a rough day, when someone's very blank, I think it's very important to be very patient, be very and pray for these people and be very kind to one another. I think this book just really opened my eyes on so many things. He talks about one part chapter. He talks about DID, dissociative identity disorder. If you ever seen the movie Split, James McAvoy plays a wonderful part in that, where he plays a guy with multiple personalities. He kidnaps these girls and he plays these different roles. He's the same person essentially, but he has these different personalities that come about. And this is real life. Some people can speak Spanish only with one personality. Some people need insulin only when they're acting in this one personality. So he talks about this woman that has this, and I thought he was going to get into interesting stories like that movie. But when he takes a quick left turn. And what he talks about is how we all, in a way, have multiple personalities. And I was like, no, that sounds like crazy. But when he breaks it down, there's an idea that your brain is not one entity. Your brain is more of like a society, a group of people working together to get you through the day, to help you function and grow. And he breaks them down into different categories. We all have what's called a manager. A manager is what keeps you organized, what keeps you on time, what keeps you successful. And it's very, very beneficial. It has a very good, important role to play in your life. But sometimes that manager is hypercritical of you, or maybe of others. Maybe when you make a mistake, that manager is like, oh, you're so stupid. You can't do anything right. You'll never amount to anything. Why would you say that? Why would you do that? I can't believe you would do that. You messed everything up. And you get hard on yourself. And then we have another part of ourselves called the firemen. The firemen are to put out the fire, obviously. But the problem is they will destroy the house as long as the fire is out. They don't even care. So this part of your brain, this part of you, I should say, your personality, your mind, is important because, it tells you to indulge, Every once in a while, you got to eat that chocolate. Every once in a while, take a relaxed day. You deserve it. But sometimes when you're having a real rough day, you're like, forget it, I'm going to eat the whole fridge. Or, you say, forget it, and you run back to your addiction, or you go get drunk, or you have crazy sex with a random person, and you end up digging yourself a bigger hole than you previously were in. And then you have what's called the exiles. The exiles are usually part of you that's creative, that's very sensitive, that tells you, it's not about the hustle and bustle and the rat race of everything. It's important to slow down and be sensitive and to love and to feel. But what happens sometimes is you get too sensitive. Why would that person say that to me? Why does everyone hate me? And then you get so depressed you can't get out of bed. You know what I mean? There's these parts of you that all have good and bad qualities. And it's not your job to condemn them. It's your job to make them all work together. It's your job to get them to stand back every once in a while and get to the root of the problem. Manager, you're being too hypercritical. Firefighters, we don't need, to be drinking right now. We need to solve this problem. Exiles, I know you're hurting, but you need to step back. And you need to get to the root of yourself, which is that little kid, that blank slate. I think the Bible always talks about, how you need to have the heart of a child to be into the kingdom of heaven. Or we need to be like more childlike. And I think that's our true self. When you come into this world, you're just a blank canvas. Before that person hurt you, before your parents, emotionally scarred you, and they throw paint onto this canvas and they paint pictures, they put things on you, people call you stupid, people call you worthless, and they draw this picture on you that you carry around with yourself, but that's not your true self, that child That child that just wants to be loved, that wants to be accepted, is your true self in your life. And I think it's so important to tell all these other mechanisms that are trying to protect you. You need to tell them, step back and let's get to that child. And I think it's so important to comfort that child. Whether you visualize yourself holding that child and be like, it's okay, we're not going to let anyone ever hurt you again. I think a good exercise too is to picture Jesus, coming into your life and holding that child and, protecting him and telling him he's forgiven, that there's nothing wrong with him, that he's created as they should be. We're made in God's image and we're loved by our Creator and by the people around us. I think it's just so easy to get in your head and to hurt yourself and do more damage than good, when in reality you're trying to help yourself. But I think there's just you gotta have self-leadership in your mind, and that'll give yourself agency, freedom, when you can lead yourself into a better direction. At the end of the day, you can have all these people in your corner. You can have a therapist, you can have a good friend, you can have good parents in your corner. But I think life is like a boxing match, where you can have these people in your corner, but the only one in the ring is you and your issues, you and the enemy, you and your trauma. And I think it's important to pull yourself out of this and have self-leadership and go to these resources, go to these people for advice and for encouragement. But at the end of the day, it's your job to apply it to yourself. I really encourage anyone who has issues, please read this book and seek a therapist. Go out, get out of your house and interact with the world around you. That it's never too late to grow. It's never too late to move past your trauma. And it's never too late to be kind to somebody and be a helping hand to someone in need. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me. Please send me book recommendations. I got a long list, but I'm going to read them. And until next time, I will see you later.